Feared by enemies, respected by criminals, and watched by the FBI. Vyacheslav Ivankov, aka Yaponchik, became a living legend in the global underworld. His journey from a sickly boy in Soviet Moscow to the most powerful Russian mafia boss in America is as dramatic as a crime thriller. Vyacheslav Ivankov, more widely known under his infamous nickname Yaponchik, carved out a name for himself as one of the most dominant and feared figures in the Soviet criminal underworld during the 1970s. He rose through the ranks to earn the coveted and powerful title of thief-in-law, a rank bestowed upon only the most respected figures in the criminal hierarchy. Not only did he command several organized crime groups across the Soviet Union, but his influence eventually extended into the United States as well. Known for his cold composure, strategic mind, and iron grip over his associates, he managed to inspire dread in enemies whether behind bars or walking free. Even now, years after his death, Ivankov's life is shrouded in an aura of legend, mystery, and half-whispered stories, many of which went with him to the grave. Born on January 2, 1940, Vyacheslav Kirillovich Ivankov came into the world in a troubled household. His early years were marked by poverty and instability, largely due to his father's addiction to alcohol, which made financial hardship a constant reality. As a child, he was physically frail and often sickly, a far cry from the feared man he would one day become. Seeking strength and control over his body, the teenage Vyacheslav threw himself into boxing and freestyle wrestling, disciplines that not only toughened his physique but also introduced him to the values of endurance and power. After finishing 8 years of basic education, he set his sights on a future in the performing arts, enrolling in a specialized circus school with the ambition of becoming a trapeze artist. It was a dream that showed promise. He was skilled and physically capable until a devastating accident abruptly ended his aspirations. A fall from the trapeze left him with a closed head injury. Though he refused medical attention at the time, the damage was substantial. During later training sessions, he began experiencing sudden blackouts, a clear sign of lingering trauma. His condition made it impossible to continue his studies, and with great disappointment, he had to walk away from the circus and all hopes of performing. Ivankov's first documented brush with the law occurred when he was just 15. Caught red-handed committing a pickpocketing offense, he reacted with such ferocity at the police station that the authorities ordered a psychiatric evaluation. At the infamous Kashchenko Psychiatric Hospital, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. During his time there, he became fascinated by legal literature and courtroom procedures, an ironic twist for someone who would spend much of his life on the wrong side of the law. A year later, he was reevaluated and sent back for compulsory treatment. But Ivankov wasn't the type to be locked away for long. He escaped from the hospital, returned home, found work as a locksmith, and eventually became a team leader. He also took up night school and, remarkably, completed his high school education externally, passing both 9th and 10th grade exams. All this while actively evading the police. However, his freedom was short-lived. At the end of 1966, he was detained once again and returned to the psychiatric facility. Doctors concluded that his earlier psychosis was the result of his head trauma, and he was released a few months later in 1967 with a clean bill of mental health. Ivankov narrowly escaped serious prison time in 1972 after being implicated in the activities of a powerful organized crime group led by another thief-in-law known as Mongol. While many of his associates were handed long prison sentences, some up to 13 years, Ivankov somehow managed to avoid conviction. Following the group's collapse, he wasted no time forming his own criminal network. His men often disguised themselves as police officers to raid the homes of individuals suspected of illicit income, businessmen, black market dealers, and underground manufacturers. These fake raids were brutal. The gang forcibly extracted information and confiscated large sums of cash, jewelry, and other valuables. The group's operations weren't confined to one city. Their reach extended across the Soviet Union, with reported incidents taking place in cities like Riga, Kazan, and Sverdlovsk. The gang didn't merely rob their victims, they often executed them. Their targets were frequently involved in illegal trade and were seen as fair game in the brutal world of Soviet-era organized crime. Although Vyacheslav Ivankov was deeply entrenched in organized crime and known within criminal circles as a ruthless and strategic leader, to the outside world, he appeared to be living a quiet, law-abiding life. Publicly, he was just another citizen holding down regular jobs, at one point working in a photo lab, and later as a coach in a children's sports school. This facade helped him maintain the illusion of normalcy while he carried on with his underground dealings. In 1974, he officially secured second-degree disability status for life, citing a psychological disorder as the basis, which further shielded him from suspicion in the eyes of the authorities. That same year, however, Ivankov found himself at the center of a deadly incident in Moscow. He was arrested after a violent altercation at the Rus restaurant ended with a fatality. Surprisingly, he wasn't prosecuted for the death itself, but rather charged with the use of forged documents, specifically a counterfeit passport and fake driver's license. The authorities opened a criminal case under Article 196, Part 3 of the RSFSR Penal Code. During the investigation, a new psychiatric evaluation was conducted, which contradicted earlier diagnoses, declaring him mentally sound. The court ultimately sentenced him to 7.5 months in prison, which he served in the notorious Buturka facility. It was during this incarceration that he adopted the legendary criminal moniker Yaponchik and was formally initiated into the elite circle of thieves-in-law. After serving his sentence, Ivankov returned to life outside prison, again masking his true activities under the guise of legitimate employment, this time as a stock manager in a vegetable store. But in reality, he had no intention of leaving the criminal world behind. In 1980, he organized yet another criminal group, which engaged heavily in extortion, racketeering, and other illicit ventures. A turning point in his life came in 1992, when he left Russia under the pretense of immigration. Initially traveling to Germany, he soon made his way to the United States, settling in New York City. There, he quickly re-established himself by building an extensive organized crime network composed of approximately 250 individuals, many of whom were former athletes and ex-KGB personnel. His name rapidly became synonymous with Russian organized crime in America, and media outlets began referring to him as the unofficial boss of the Russian mafia in New York. In 1994, the FBI launched a full-scale surveillance operation against Ivankov, assigning 18 agents to monitor him around the clock. The operation stemmed from serious allegations that he had attempted to extort $2.7 million from the owners of a company called Summit International. Investigators collected a substantial amount of evidence, which proved sufficient to proceed with formal charges. While awaiting trial, Ivankov followed the advice of his legal team and agreed to speak with the media. In his public statements, he portrayed himself as a symbol of defiance, describing his life as a form of social protest against the communist regime he had grown up under. He firmly denied any involvement in criminal activity on American soil. Nevertheless, in 1997, the court found him guilty, and he received a prison sentence of 9 years and 7 months. He began serving his time at Allenwood Federal Correctional Institution. However, in 1999, he was transferred to a high-security wing reserved for dangerous offenders after heroin was discovered in his cell. After serving the bulk of his sentence, he was deported back to Russia in 2004. Upon arrival, Russian authorities charged him with the murder of 2 Turkish businessmen, but the case quickly fell apart due to lack of evidence. Freed once again, he resumed his underground career, this time acting as a mediator in conflicts between rival criminal factions across various countries. Despite previously considering returning to the U.S., Ivankov later expressed a strong dislike for the country in public comments. As for his personal life, Ivankov's first wife was Lydia Ivazova, a woman with noble roots tracing back to Assyrian royalty. Due to this prestigious lineage, Vyacheslav earned his first Underworld nickname, the Assyrian son-in-law. The couple married in 1960 but eventually divorced in 1975. Together, they had two sons, Gennady and Eduard. Despite their parents' separation, the children maintained a relationship with both mother and father. While neither son officially engaged in criminal activity, confidential FBI reports suggest they were involved in laundering money for their father's crime syndicate. Gennady chose to settle in the United States, whereas Eduard relocated to Austria. Both lived abroad, away from the public eye, and presented themselves as disconnected from their father's notorious legacy, though the shadow of his influence never quite disappeared. Though Vyacheslav Ivankov was not the biological father, he took a deeply paternal role in raising the son of one of his longtime romantic partners. The boy, Viktor Nikiforov, who would later be widely known under the nickname Vyacheslav, came to view Ivankov not just as a father figure, but as a personal hero. Ivankov, in turn, treated Viktor with great seriousness and affection, going so far as to personally perform the highly respected ritual of crowning him, the symbolic initiation into the elite brotherhood of thieves-in-law. This significant event occurred when Viktor was only 22 years old, making him one of the youngest individuals ever to enter that exclusive criminal echelon. Viktor's path in the criminal underworld was intense and meteoric, yet tragically short-lived. At the age of 18, he received a sentence of 5 years in a high-security prison, an early indicator of the danger and intensity that would mark his life. Though he quickly made a name for himself, his rising star was extinguished just as swiftly. At 28, he was fatally shot in a targeted assassination near his residence. The head wound he sustained proved lethal, cutting short a life that had only just begun to mirror the legend of his adoptive father. In the early 1990s, when Ivankov was working to solidify his presence in the United States, he entered into a marriage that existed only on paper, a calculated move intended to help him secure legal residency. His wife was Irina Ola, a woman born in Kiev in 1974, who had previously served as an accompanist for the famous Russian émigré singer Willy Tokarev. The relationship between Ivankov and Irina appears to have been entirely transactional, serving purely bureaucratic purposes. While in America, Ivankov developed a genuine, long-term relationship with Fina Komissar, whose maiden name was Roslina. Although she never officially became his legal spouse, Fina stood by his side through the ups and downs of his life in exile, remaining with him until his final days. However, after his death, several women stepped forward, each claiming to be the true widow of the infamous gangster. Among them was a mystic who goes by the name Nicole Kuznetsova, or simply Nika, who publicly stated in interviews that she had a son with Ivankov, the youngest of his known children, named Georgy, or Igor. While her claims have not been independently verified, her version of events has fueled further speculation about the private life of the elusive mob boss. In 2009, the life of Vyacheslav Ivankov came to a dramatic and violent end. On July 28, outside a Moscow restaurant called Thai Elephant, two snipers lay in wait, their rifles aimed through openings cut into the tarpaulin covering the back of a parked Gazelle van. When Ivankov arrived, the shooters opened fire, striking him critically. Despite the chaos, his bodyguards managed to drag him inside the restaurant and quickly transport him to a hospital. The injuries he sustained were catastrophic, and although doctors initially fought to save him, complications set in. On October 9th, he died as a result of peritonitis, a deadly abdominal infection triggered by the gunshot wounds. The farewell ceremony for Ivankov took place on October 13th at the Church of the Resurrection of the Word. He was laid to rest at Moscow's Vagankovo Cemetery, a final resting place reserved for notable figures. Despite the family's wish to keep the burial discreet and free from media attention, the event became a spectacle, drawing significant coverage in newspapers and on television. Around 500 individuals from the criminal world gathered to pay their respects, a testament to the mark he left on the underworld. In the summer of 2011, a striking monument was unveiled at Ivankov's grave. Rather than a simple photograph, the gravestone features a life-sized statue of the man himself, seated in front of a 3-meter-high wall adorned with a cross and symbolic prison bars. The likeness is uncannily accurate, reflecting his actual height of 178 centimeters and typical weight. Visitors to his grave have created a bizarre tradition, placing a fake 500-ruble bill under the statue's foot and pouring vodka into the small glass it holds in its hand. Curiously, even the engraving on the monument contains a small yet noticeable error. His last name is carved without the soft sign, which is typically included in Russian orthography. After years of silence surrounding the murder, a major development occurred in August 2024 when Astamir Budba, the man believed to be responsible for Ivankov's assassination, was convicted in absentia and sentenced to 19 years in prison. At the time of the verdict, the convicted killer was still at large and listed as a fugitive on international wanted lists. What many people do not realize is that Ivankov was not only a gangster but also dabbled in the world of literature and art. He wrote poetry, deeply personal pieces that were later incorporated into the music of Russian performer Vladislav Medyanik. In 2005, during his time in prison, Ivankov wrote an entire collection of poems and children's fairy tales. He even began writing an autobiography, which unfortunately never saw publication. He was known to be personally acquainted with legendary Russian singer Joseph Kobzon, who not only attended Ivankov's banquets but also went so far as to submit official appeals to law enforcement requesting early parole for his friend. Ivankov, along with another famed thief-in-law, Ded Kasan, was considered one of the major reformers of the criminal world, pioneers who transformed the image of the modern Russian mobster. They were among the first to actively cultivate a public persona, understanding the value of media exposure. Gang meetings, turf wars, and disputes began to be reported in newspapers and even discussed on television, a radical departure from the traditional secrecy of the old criminal code. Through this transformation, Ivankov helped usher in a new era where gangsters were not just feared but also mythologized, turning their lives into a kind of dark folklore.